I have been trying to start with the index just to get you guys used to how it works. But remember, this is not ICD-10-CM. You do not have to start in the index. So if there's a very small section, I think it's very feasible for you to just print out the 3 or 4 tables and just stick them somewhere and actually just code straight off of the tables once you've identified the root operation. It's sometimes very necessary to identify a body system, a body part. Using the index, once you have that first 3 to 4 values, you can go to the table, and then you identify the last 3 to 4 values that you're constructing in your code. Remember, it's a value in the table. It becomes a character once you slot it into the code. Once your 4th character has been selected, you must stay in that row in the table. All right, so here's an example, an intramedullary rod insertion left femoral shaft for a non-displaced fracture. Okay, so why are we not coding this with reposition, which is kind of the ICD-10-PCS version of a reduction? Well, notice it says it's non-displaced, so there was no reduction. So what we've got is the insertion. They're inserting the rod, which is our main term, and the rod is a device, because remember, a device is left in the body. Now, what does the system use for the term of intramedullary internal fixation device? Remember, we have those tables at the end of this system, and one of them is a device aggregation table. And you'll notice when you look up the term that the physician has given you, we find that it's going to be used with lower bones or upper bones, and it's known as an internal fixation device. So now we have the information we need. So we know we're doing an insertion of a device into a lower bone. That's as close as we can get in the index. That gives us the first 4 characters that we're going to use. We go to our table, 0QH, we find femoral shaft. Was it open or percutaneous? We don't know. We know we're going to use that internal fixation device, and there's no qualifier. Notice with the documentation I have available, I cannot completely code this. And 6 out of 7 isn't good enough. So you have to go back to the physician and find, or back to the chart and find that information. All right, so I'm going to go through these by the major divisions of ICD-10-PCS. So we're going to look at the Med-Surg section 0 case studies first, and there's more of those than anything else because that's the biggest part. And then we'll look at the Med-Surg related sections, and then we'll look at the ancillary sections. So we have case A, a preoperative diagnosis of a laceration, distal left index finger with partial severance of the distal phalanx. And the operation is an open reduction, internal fixation of the distal phalanx, left index finger. All right, non-excisional debridement of the laceration of the left index finger, and a repair of the laceration of the left middle finger. All right, so notice we have some information here that would be very helpful when we're coding the ICD-10-CM for this procedure. All right, so we have information that they used fluoroscopy to thoroughly evaluate the area. Then they put on a tourniquet and got the blood out of that limb. The wound was irrigated. Subcutaneous tissues were debrided of all devitalized tissue, trash, and foreign bodies. Then they used a wire to drill across the fracture site in the joint. They stabilized that. They closed the skin. The laceration on the middle finger, they then repaired that, and then, of course, they put dressings on. Okay, so this is what we would code. 0PSV04Z, reposition phalanx finger left. Remember, reduction is not the term used in ICD-10-PCS, it's reposition, but the index nicely tells you that. Yay. 0J2K0ZZ, extraction, subcutaneous tissue and fascia of the hand. That is the debridement. Notice again, the index saves us because it gives you the translation from what the physician is going to tell you a debridement, but in ICD-10-PCS, that's an extraction. 0JQK0ZZ, repair subcutaneous tissue and fascia, hand left. That's this laceration repair. And notice we have a guideline that applies here. If a procedure is performed on a portion of the body part that does not have a separate body part value, code the body part value corresponding to the whole body part. And this is what we would find, and this is how we would build the code. And of course, the body part here, this is where the guideline applies. Since we can't be as specific as to the left finger that was involved, we go with the next up body part, so to speak. So it'd be left hand is as close as we can get. All right, so here's what the tables would look like. Notice we can get pretty specific. It was open, there was a device used, no qualifier. Remember, when you get to a table, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you're in a row. And sometimes you need a tiebreaker further back before you can decide which row to stay in. Because in this table, there's actually 2 rows that have V for the left finger phalanx. So then you have to look further down the line, so to speak, to find your tiebreaker is what I call them. All right, case B, we have a left upper lid laceration and a chin laceration. So the operation is a repair of the left upper eyelid and chin lacerations. Pretty straightforward. And we pick up what we care about. They did actually do a suture through the lid margin, and then more in the deep tissue, and then the chin laceration was closed. Pretty straightforward. So the codes would be 08QPXZZ, repair eyelid upper left. Suture, again, gets us to repair, so 0HQIXZZ, repair, skin of the face is as close as we can get. Now notice, we have some guideline here. It's pretty straightforward. Components of a procedure specified in the root operation definition and explanation are not coded separately. Procedural steps necessary to reach the operative site and close the operative site are also not coded separately. So this is pretty much the way we've been coding in ICD-9. That's not a change, okay? Yay. All right, here's how you would get the codes built. Here's what the actual table looks like. Notice some of these tables have lots and lots of rows. I think I found one had 18 different rows. This one only has 2 rows. Some tables only have 1 row. All right. So here we would go 0HQ, face is 1. It was external. No device, no qualifier. Pretty straightforward. Case C, we have a full thickness burn to the right foot. And what did they do? They did a split thickness skin graft from the right thigh to the right foot. And going a bit back to ICD-10-CM, we have some information here. Would we pick up and code a history of cardiac disease and hypertension? Would we pick up the smoking history? Now, if this person was a current smoker, I think I would code that because smoking impedes healing. But since he quit 10 years ago, probably not relevant unless you're picking it up for some other purpose. Patient presents for elective debridement of wound and a split thickness skin graft. All right, so we have a sharp debridement And then we have a 4 by 5 centimeter split thickness skin graft harvested from the upper right thigh. And yes, all of this is important, and yes, you do have to read it, but I have tried to highlight the things that are going to help you get the documentation that counts in getting to the ICD-10-PCS code. All right, so the answer would be 0HRMX74, replacement, skin of the foot, right. We also need to code the graft. It tells us nicely that it's a replacement. And when we go there, we find, and then we also have the excision of the skin. And there is a guideline. If an autograft, remember, auto means from the self, is obtained from a different body part in order to complete the objective of the procedure, a separate procedure is coded, excuse me. And here's our table, 0HRMX73. There's 6 possible rows. However, this is the only row with the body part value for the right foot. So I didn't show all the other parts. It's actually, this row is actually even more choices, but I didn't show them all. All right, and then here's the autograft. So again, we go 0HB for excision, the skin from the right upper leg, it was external, no device, no qualifier. Case D, displaced comminuted fracture of the shaft of the right humerus. Open reduction, internal fixation of fracture of shaft of right humerus. This is where you really need to know, was this a pathologic fracture or a traumatic fracture? And that's why we sometimes need the diagnostic information to get to the right code. However, remember, this is not like CPT where some of the codes actually have the diagnosis in the procedure. History. So this is a 4th grader, and he tripped and he fell. So we know this is a traumatic fracture, which is going to help us. All right, so they made an incision, they manually reduced, important, and they fixed with 2 pins. All right, so what did the doctor say he did again? Open reduction, internal fixation of a fracture. All righty. 0PS, F04Z. Again, if we start with what the doctor told us, I think it's best to always start with what the physician tells you and only try to do your required translation if that doesn't work. So if you start with reduction in the index, it nicely tells you go to reposition. So we're repositioning the humeral shaft of the right humerus. And notice we have a guideline. Application of a cast or splint in conjunction with reposition is not coded separately. Treatment of a non-displaced fracture is coded to whatever they did about it. So we go to our table, 0PS. We find our body part. It was open. Yes, they did put in an internal fixation device, and there's no qualifier. This is one of our bigger tables. There's 8 possible rows. 2 rows have the F body part with the same approach value. So you actually have to go all the way out to value 6 as your tiebreaker for this particular one. All right, here's case E. Unfortunately, this young man did not survive this, and he was not wearing his helmet. Skull fracture of the left temporal and orbital roof areas with depressed zygomatic arch on the left side. All right, so not good. All right, so we had continuous monitoring of his intracranial pressure. That was a percutaneous method. Yay, doctor. Then he was placed on a ventilator following an endotracheal intubation, and basically there was no improvement. and they showed no brain activity, and therefore his life support was removed. So what do we have to code on the procedure side? We have the fact that there was insertion of a device in the trachea. There was performance of ventilation. There was monitoring of the central nervous system and measurement of the central nervous system electrical activity. All right, so here are our tables. Notice it's pretty straightforward once we find interluminal device endotracheal airway. Here is the ventilation. Here is the central nervous system monitoring of the pressure, the intracranial pressure. Notice this is a big table, 27 possible rows here. So sometimes when you get to the tables, you have to spend a little time finding the right row. And then here is our electrical activity. This is when they were checking for brain activity before they made the decision to remove life support. All right. Here's another young man with a bucket handle tear of the left medial meniscus. And what did they do? They performed an arthroscopic partial medial meniscectomy. All right, and again, we have great info there to help us with our ICD-10-CM coding. All right, so but what did we do? What did they do for the actual procedure? We were told it was an arthroscopy, so we have 3 ports. That confirms, yes, there was an arthroscopy performed. Anterior portion of the medial meniscus had a flap tear, which was removed. That's basically what we're coding, excuse me. 0SBD4ZZ, excision, joint, knee, left. And how did we get there? We checked our main term, which was meniscectomy, C excision, lower joints. Okay. And notice we are going to code an excision, not a resection, because in ICD-10-PCS, excision is when only a portion of a body part is removed, and arthroscopic, it was a percutaneous endoscopy, so we're pretty clear on that. Here's how we would build the code. This is what the table actually looks like. 0SB, D for the knee joint on the left side. We've decided it was percutaneous endoscopic because it was an arthroscopy. No device was left in the body and no qualifier because this was not a diagnostic procedure. All right, so we have case G, a laryngoscopy with intraluminal dilation of a laryngeal stenosis. Here's our code, 0C7S8ZZ. Lots of Z's in ICD-10-PCS. You'll really see a lot of Z's when we get to the ancillary section. And here's our answer as it would look in the table. Pretty straightforward. Oop, I made a mistake. That arrow is in the wrong place. Fix it, fix it. This arrow should be down here. Can't be in 2 rows at the same time. No, 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 no. Please fix that. All right, so what do we have here is a colonoscopy to the level of the cecum. So yes, we know it's a colonoscopy, not a sigmoidoscopy or any other oscopy. It's a colonoscopy. And the path report diagnosis says tubular adenoma of sigmoid colon. So even though the doctor here on the procedure doesn't tell us that it wasn't just looking around, he actually did or she did something. So this is when you need to read carefully here. The doctor didn't give you a complete procedure description. This is why, as a coder, you never code from just what the doctor says the procedure was. You have to read the report. All right, so we have a lot of information about how they ready to do the procedure. They inserted the scope. And remember, when they're doing these scopes, they usually advance the scope as far as they can, and they're not really checking or looking. They're just getting it as far as they can get it in. And then as they're withdrawing, that's when they're looking around, and that's when they're finding things, and that's when they're doing procedures, okay? So here we find some polyps and a large prolapsing mass. 2 small polyps were biopsied using cold biopsy forceps and sent to PATH. So here's where we get to finally, what did they do other than look around? So we're going to code ZDBN8VX. All right. All right, and here's our table. Again, we had 3 possible rows. Only one of them had the N value because the procedure was performed in the sigmoid colon. And we have an endoscopic via a natural opening. No device was left in, and this was diagnostic. Case I, accidental amputation of the right ring finger. This is a degloving injury, which would be useful on the CM side. But what did we actually do? It was an amputation. And remember, in ICD-10-PCS and ICD-10-CM, amputation is the injury. Detachment is what you use when there's a surgical amputation. So they're trying to keep those 2 terms separated and meaning slightly different things. All right, so when you're looking at detachment of a finger, of the digit, I should say, there are qualifiers involved as to whether this detachment was complete, high, mid, or low. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Now, here's something that I became aware of as I was doing all of the case studies during this series of webinars. You will find very occasionally the index is wrong, and it's usually a little bit of a typo error, I think, more than anything else. And it's just something that somebody who's in charge of the index just hasn't caught up with, I guess you could say. And the problem is there's a transposition right here. So again, it's great when the index gives you the whole darn thing, but don't code from that. Go to the table and verify. Okay, so 0x6, S for the ring finger, 0 for open, Z for no device, and here's our qualifier issue, is where was it actually detached? This was considered complete, all right? And you'll notice when we build that code, it's almost exactly the same, but this is flipped. So make sure you verify in the index. I mean in the table, excuse me. Case J, another laceration. I think this is a duplicate. Yeah, this is a duplicate. I apologize. Let me flip right through that. All right, we're going to go flip right over to case K if you're following on a printed out version of this. We're on slide 58, by the way. I know I'm very bad about not telling you the slide number we're on. I apologize. Again, here is a person who's in having a heart attack. So we're making a little bit of a change now. And so a Swan-Ganz catheter was inserted percutaneously in the right subclavian vein, guided into the right pulmonary artery. Pressures were monitored overnight, and then she was transferred to a hospital, another hospital. So we have insertion of a device. in the pulmonary artery, and we're going to go with the right pulmonary artery. So we're going to code 02HQ32Z. Also, now once they had that in there, they actually monitored pressures. So we're going to use our monitoring of a pressure. It was arterial. So we're going to go to 4A13, 3 for percutaneous, B for pressure, C for coronary. Excuse me. What would we use? Pulmonary or coronary? Let's go back and look. They were monitoring her heart, so I would go with C for coronary. So if you would please change that up here to a C. All right, percutaneous placement, intrathecal infusion pump for pain management. All right, so this is where our, starting with what the physician tells us, makes us realize we've got to do some serious translating thinking about this one. So we think placement in ICD-10-PCS, placement is a section. There is no root operation for placement. So what are they doing? They're putting it into the body. It is a device, so it's insertion of a device. We have to think a little bit there. So we have insertion of a device, and it's intrathecal, so it's the spinal canal. So we're going to go to, where's my little, there he is, 00HU33. All right, case M, a left heart cath with laser ablation, and I'm not going to say that, arrhythmogenic. Oh, that's not too bad. All right, so we start, again, I like to start with what the physician told us. Ablation, the index nicely tells us to see destruction. We go to destruction, and what are we, where are we, what are we doing? Oh, goodness. All right, so I go to the body part key, and all of these are where your rhythm goes. Your AV node, your bundle of Hist, your bundle of Kent. It doesn't matter which one, the body part key says use conduction mechanism. So now we know what to do when we go to the table. All right, so you had to do a little thinking there. I went to the table and I'm like, uh-oh, nothing's here that makes any sense as far as knowing my body parts, but when I went to that body part key, then I know what to use. So sometimes you go to the table and you realize you're missing a piece of information, i.e. a translation. You have to back out and you have to think about what you know about anatomy, what you know about physiology, what you know about pathophys, and that's how I got to the body part key, and that's how I found, hey, use conduction mechanism. So once I had that, it was pretty straightforward. So every once in a while, you'll have one where you start, you go somewhere in the table, you're not happy, you have to back out and start again, or find more information, I should say. So in this case, we're going to code 025833ZZ. All right, case N, a PTCA, and this let me take a little break here and spend a little bit of time talking about the index. The index has really changed in the last few years, and I have to say I don't think they have anybody working on it that really understands the indexing process. And I have to say, as a former librarian, they do things in this index that just drive me up the wall. And what I have found is they tend to use, how do I want to say this? The English language sequencing to index body parts. And so instead of, and it's a mix because you can go device artery, device vein, and they'll have things underneath artery, the specific names, under things, veins, specific names. But then other times you can't find anything there, and it'll be under something like insertion device coronary artery. So it's not consistent. And I'm thinking that over the next few years, once they get the system in place, there will be some improvements in the index. So right now, my advice to you is if you've been using ICD-9 for many years and you're really used to that chunking type of indexing where you go to the biggest part and then the next down part and the next down part, which is very consistent in ICD-9, but of course they've had over 100 years to get that right. Don't give up if that's not the way it's working in this index. You have to go and try all the words, so to speak, to make sure you find out whether or not it's in the index. I hope that was fairly clear. All right, back to case N. So we go PTCA, very nicely tells us to see dilation of the heart and great vessels. If we go start with the main term of angioplasty, if your brain thinks like that, it nicely tells you the same thing. Now, notice with angioplasty, we actually have three possibilities. So again, you as the coder have to read the documentation and you have to understand what was the objective of the procedure. Was it a dilation? Was it a repair? Or was it a replacement that was done with the angioplasty? But in this case, it's a dilation. So we go to our table of 0, 2, 7. We find our row, coronary artery. It was percutaneous. No device was left in as far as we know, and there's no qualifier. Now, this is the kind of thing where if you get here and you see all these, you're building your code and you see all these possibilities, you might want to go back and read your documentation and make sure that you've got the right thing. And of course, I'm not in the real world. I've just got this one little statement. Based on this statement, I said no device. But you have a little bit more information, hopefully. And at that point, I would have backed up and just double checked and made sure that a device wasn't left in. Okay, case O, percutaneous placement of pacemaker lead in left atrium. Okay, so we've already gone through our placement is a section, not a root operation. Therefore, we've got to translate placement into insertion of a device into the left atrium. So we're going to go 0, 2, H, 7, 3, J, Z. Pretty straightforward. Most of these are pretty straightforward. I'm trying to show you, hopefully you're not, I know it's only a week to go and you're probably freaking out, but just try to stay calm. Case P, heart cath with cardiac mapping. In this case, MAP is a root objective, and it's mapping of the conduction mechanism. And so we have 0, 2, K, 8, 3, Z, Z. And here's a good example. This is the entire table. There's one row. It's all there is. There ain't no more. So not all of them are horribly complicated. Case Q, open suture ligation of failed AV graft of the right brachial artery. Okay. Ligation, it says see occlusion. So we're doing an occlusion of an artery, yay. Here we have our subdivision of brachial, and then we go down to right. So we know we're going to go to table 0, 3L. We find 7 for brachial artery. We were told it was open. We weren't told about any device being left in, and no qualifier. So our code is going to be 0, 3, L, 7, 0, ZZ. Case R is a thrombectomy of the left cephalic vein. Okay, we start with what the doctor told us, thrombectomy. We're told to go to extirpation. So we have extirpation vein cephalic left, 05CF. And extirpation is one of those words that are in this system, and I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen a doctor code document extirpation. So this is one where you're going to need to translate. You really do need to, I think this is one you really need to think about and sort of memorize this. What is an extirpation? It's taking or cutting out solid matter from a body part. So in this case, the thrombus is the solid matter. An embolism would be a solid matter. Okay. All right, so we're at table 05C. We're looking at the left cephalic vein. It was an open procedure. No device, no qualifier. A non-excisional transnasal placement of a restrictive stent in the lacrimal duct. So we look at that placement, but why did they do the placement? It wasn't just to insert something and leave it there. It was to restrict the lacrimal duct. Okay, so in this case, our root operation is restriction, not insertion. All right, so we have restriction, duct, lacrimal, and we don't know if it was left or right from this diagnostic statement. Uh-oh, what do we do? Well, let's build the code, and then you could go back in the chart and try and find that information. So we have 08V, lacrimal duct. Notice I've got the question mark here because we actually have two rows with the same information, so we've got to go to a tiebreaker. All right, notice it says I hate that one, transnasal, so we're going to go natural or artificial opening. It was an intraluminal device, and there's no qualifier. So our code is going to be 08V, we don't know left or right, ZDZ. So at this point, again, this is completely wrong at this point. You can't give them 6 out of 7 characters. They're going to deny the claim. That is not a valid code. So it's completely wrong as far as the computer is concerned. You have to get that piece of information. You have to go back in the chart. You have to see if somebody said left or right. And if they didn't, you have to query. You have no option. You've got to know that. Okay, case 2 is a tracheostomy tube exchange. All right, let's start with what the doctor told us. The index nicely tells, this is why I'm saying start with the index, at least at the beginning when you're really getting comfortable with ICD-10-PCS. After a while, then maybe you can start going to the tables. But at least at the beginning, it helps you with this translation process in an awful lot of cases. So we start with what the doctor said. See change device in. So we go change device in. We find trachea. So we know we need table 0B2. We go to 0B2, 1 for the trachea. It was external. What are we going to do? Was it an intraluminal device, endotracheal airway, or was it a tracheostomy device? Okay, so we go to our device table, and a tracheostomy tube is considered to be a tracheostomy device. So we're going to go with FZ. So in this case, we're going to code 0B21XFZ. So when you get to this kind of situation where the terms in the table are not nicely matching up with your documentation, you can't guess. You've got to go do some research in the system and use those tables to know what to go do in this table. All right. Percutaneous endoscopic gastrostomy tube exchange. All right, so exchange again gets us change device in. It's in the intestinal tract. We have a decision between lower and upper. The stomach is upper, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. We could have also started with, okay, this PEG tube is probably in there for feeding. You could see feeding device, change device in, it sends you to the same place. It's nice when the index sends you to the same place. It helps you verify you are in the right place. So we go to table 0D2, it's upper intestinal tract. The approach was external. It was a feeding device, and there's no qualifier. All right. So when I was first trying to decide between upper and lower intestinal tract, I checked the body part key, and it doesn't tell you anything. All right, so there's actually a guideline about this intestinal tract upper versus lower situation. And I recommend, if you haven't sat down and just literally sat down and read the guidelines, I think it's a really good idea. It really helps you not only pick up little things like this, but it also helps you see kind of the logic process that drove the development of this system. And I think that helps you as a coder. If you understand the logic, it's easier to code in this. Okay, so in the GI system, the general body part values upper and lower are provided as an option for root operations, change, inspection, removal, and revision. Notice only those four. The upper intestinal tract includes the esophagus down to and including the duodenum. And this has shifted, I apologize. This should be, oh goodness. I've lost my place. Hold on, back up. This should be underlined, not crossed out, okay? The portion of the GI tract from the jejunum down and including the rectum and anus. So we would go with upper because it's in the stomach. All right, partial thickness skin graft to the right lower leg, and it was an autograft. Now, because we just coded that other situation with an autograft, and if it's in a different body part, you need another code. We're like, okay, where'd the autograft come from? I need more information. This is where you go back in the chart. Or if you didn't catch that when you first started to code, when you get to the table, you're going to realize you've got to go back in the chart. All right, so in this case, we would code 0. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. My fingers are clicking when I don't want to. Okay. We're going to go 0HR, skin of the right lower leg. It was external. It was from the self, and it was partial thickness. Okay, so we can build this code, but we still need to find out where did the graft tissue come from on this person's body, because if it's from a different body part, then we need a separate procedure. If it's from the same body part, i.e. the right lower leg or whatever the body part, yeah, right lower leg, so if this was on the, let me see, if this was on the ankle and they took the tissue off the calf, we only have one thing to code. If the procedure was done on the ankle and they got the graft off of the stomach, then we need another code. So you have to know that piece of information. Okay, case W, change of Foley urinary catheter. Okay, in this case, we go change a device in the bladder. Woo! And notice sometimes the index gives you 3 letters to get you to the table. I should say 3 values. Sometimes it will give you 4, sometimes it gives you 5, sometimes it gives you 7. I have learned, don't trust it, verify. Okay, so in this case, we're going to go to table 0T2, Pick up the bladder. It was external. It's a drainage device, and there's no qualifier. So our code is 0T2BX0Z.